Hello everyone, my name is Ankit Jain and I welcome you all to my channel Tech Journey with Ankit. This is part 5 of our Apex interview preparation series, and in this part we will be discussing the frequently asked questions based on asynchronous. Before this part we have published few more Apex interview preparation series part, and in this series we are discussing all those questions that you folks only have shared with me either on LinkedIn or on my YouTube comments videos as well. So in case there are a few more questions that you want me to cover, do let me know again in the comment section. I will make sure that to cover those in the future videos as well. So if you folks like to connect with me, you can definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can connect with me on the LinkedIn and also join our Telegram channels as well, where we discussed all the different types of questions that you folks only encounter in your interview preparation series. So the first question that we'll be discussing for today is, why does the future method not support the S object data type? We all know that in the future method we can only pass the primitive data type. That we all know, but most of the times I have seen that people not able to answer why the Salesforce restrict to not pass the S object data type as an argument. The reason being here is it is not guaranteed that when your future method will be executed, so that the S objects that you are passing it as an argument might change when the future method will be executed. And for that reason, Salesforce does not allow you to pass the S object type as a parameter. The way you should handle this kind of a scenario here is you should pass the ID, and in your future method, you should go and make the query on those record. As you can see in this example, what we are doing here is we are passing here the ID, and after passing the ID, we are fetching the latest S object record. So that is the recommended approach from the Salesforce whenever you have to work on the S object. But many times I have seen that people do apply one alternate way to handle this kind of a scenario where they are sure that your S object will not be changing. Although I'll not recommend to go for that approach, but in case in your interview they have asked for the alternate way, you should also say that by using the serializing and the deserializing approach, you can pass the S object. The way you should do this here is, in your future method, you will accept the input as a string, and as soon as you receive the input as a string, you should go and deserialize it. However, while invoking the future method, in case you have to pass any S object, pass it in the form of serialized way. So as soon as you are receiving the serialized string, in the first statement in your future method should be go and deserialize that and process the S object. Again, I'm repeating, it's not the recommended way, it's just an alternative way to do that. So there are few frequently asked questions, mostly one-liner questions that you should know if you are appearing for the interview. For example, can we call a future method from another future method? The answer is no. The chaining is not possible with the help of future method, and that is another limitation of the future method. So we cannot call another future method from one future method. Another question here is, can we call a future method from a batch job? Again, the answer is no. We cannot call a future method from a batch job as well. The reason being, we discussed in the last session, or I believe we discussed in the today's session as well, that maximum 50 future jobs can be invoked in one transaction. If you are invoking the future methods from the batch Apex, there's a high probability of hitting the limits. That's why Salesforce does not allow you to do that. Again, there's a workaround for here as well. I have seen many blogs over the web where they have put a workaround that you can do that using the web service. Personally, I have never tried, so I cannot comment on that. But yes, that is also one of the approach that is possible. Next one here is, what is the limit on the number of future methods invocation per transaction? Just now I'm talking about the limit of future methods that you can invoke in per transaction is 50. And because of this limit only, Salesforce does not allow you to invoke the future methods from batch Apex. Next one, can you schedule a future method to execute periodically? No. Again, we cannot schedule the future methods. They are designed for the one-time asynchronous execution approach. So scheduling a future method to execute periodically is also not possible. Next one here is, what all the key limitations of the future methods that you should keep in mind. First one here is, future methods are not something which you should use whenever you have to process the large set of records. To process the large set of records, Salesforce have a specific asynchronous Apex approach, that is the batch. So you should go for that option only. As I said, we cannot invoke one future method from another future method. So chaining is also not possible with the help of future method. Next, this one also we discussed just now. It only supports the primitive data types. You cannot pass S objects or collection of S objects as a parameter whenever you are working on the future method. And the tracing is not possible with the future method. Programmatically, you cannot track whether the future method is completed or not. This is possible to achieve in other asynchronous approach like the queuable, schedulable, or the batch Apex, but it is not possible to do that because whenever your future method is submitting, it is not returning the job ID. And as you don't have the job ID, it is not possible to do that tracing. Next one here is it can't be called from the batch Apex. That is another limitation of the future method. It cannot be called from the batch. Another few questions, and these questions are specifically based on the schedulable Apex now. What is the maximum number of jobs that can be scheduled at a given time? So in your org, you can only schedule maximum 100 jobs. And how you will find which jobs are scheduled? So for that, you have to go to the setup, and in the setup, you will put the scheduled jobs. You will see all the scheduled jobs in your org. Another question here is, does scheduled Apex support the callout? Again, the answer is no. Your scheduled Apex does not support the callout. But there are two workarounds that you can do that. You can do that by invoking the future method where the future method is annotated as callout is equal to true. You can also do that from the batch Apex as well. Next one here is how to count the number of scheduled jobs. So whenever you have to count any scheduled job, you have to go for the object that is the cron job details object. And you have to go to the cron trigger object, and in that cron trigger object you will look for the cron job details dot job type is equal to 7. 7 here represents the schedulable Apex. So whenever you have to programmatically count how many number of scheduled jobs has been configured, you will make a query to the cron trigger object. Okay, this is how you can achieve it. Next one, can you write a sample batch Apex class? Again, many times I have seen that specifically for the freshers, this question has been asked where they will ask you to write down the batch Apex. Again, here the intent is not to check the syntax, but to remember whether you should remember to implement the particular interface or not, whether you should remember to write down the particular method names or not, right? Start, execute, and finish method, whether you are able to write down these methods or not, right? Whether you are able to put the correct return type for the start method or not. Okay, so your start method have the two return types. Either you can go for the database dot query locator or you can go for the iterable as well. So here I am giving an example of a database dot query locator where I'll be putting the query and return those records as well. Okay, so this is how the typical batch Apex class will look like. So make sure that you should definitely practice by writing down the batch Apex class by yourself. You can keep writing the class something like this. Make sure you are executing it as well. Next question, can you explain about the three methods of the batch Apex? As I shown you, we do have the three methods available in the batch Apex. One is the start method, second is the execute method, and third is the finish method. Now the question here is, what is the significance of each and every method which is available in the batch Apex? So the first method that we do have here is the start method. This method will be automatically called at the beginning of the Apex job. The first method of the batch Apex that will be called here is the start method. This method is basically responsible to collect the records that needs to be processed by the batch Apex. So the main purpose of the start method here is the collection method, collection of records. Second one here is the execute method. Execute method performs an operation which we want to perform on those records. So whatever the business logic that you have to execute on the selected records, you will put that business logic into the execute method. And the third one is the finish method. Finish method will execute after all the batches has been processed. In case you have to send any confirmation email or you have to submit another batch job, you can do all those stuff under the finish method. Again, these methods are mandatory to implement whenever you are using the database dot batchable interface. If you are not implementing any of this method, you will get the compile time error. Next one, as I said, your start method can have the two return types. One is the database dot query locator, and another one here is the iterable as well. So first, let's go and talk about what is database.queryLocator, when you should go for the database.queryLocator, and when you should go for the iterable interface. So in your start method, if you have to include the code that can collect the records method and then pass those collected records to the execute method, then you should go for the database.queryLocator. The key part to identify with the database.queryLocator here is by using this, you can query up to 50 million records. Using this, you can query up to 50 million records. So in case you do have a requirement where you have to directly make a query on the S objects and fetch those records, prefer to go for the database.queryLocator. Because by using this database.queryLocator, you are passing the limit of the SOQL queries. You guys have to let me know in the comment section how many records we can fetch by using the SOQL query, right? And that limit we are bypassing by using the database.queryLocator. So if the start method returns a query locator, optional scope parameter. This parameter is also very important. Whenever we are executing the batch Apex, we always pass the optional scope parameter, right? Not mandatory. In case you are not passing, then what is the default value? Again, do let me know in the comment section. I believe I do have that covered in the upcoming slides as well. But in case you have watched till here, do let me know what is the default value of the optional scope parameter. So if you are not passing that value, it will work on that value. But in case you are passing that value, then the maximum value that you can put here is the 2000. So in the case of database.queryLocator, the maximum value of the optional scope parameter here is 2000. These are the three key points that you should be answering whenever anyone asks you about the database.queryLocator. And if they have asked you to write down the syntax, this is how it will look like. You have the database.queryLocator as the return type in the start method. And how to return those records? For that, we have to execute the method database.getQueryLocator. Okay, and here you can fetch up to the 50 million records. Next one here is the iterable interface in the batch Apex. Now, what is the need of having the two interfaces? One is the database.queryLocator and second is the iterable. I have seen many of the people not work on this iterable interface, and this question specifically comes for the experienced professional, right? So they might ask you whether you have worked on the iterable interface, and if you said yes, they might ask you the specific scenario. Okay, so the specific scenario that I worked in my experience here was whenever I have to go and process the CSV file into the batch Apex, I have preferred to use the iterable interface. Okay, so in the start method, you can include the code provided the developers with the power to iterate over the record. So where you should go and define this interface in the start method, you should go and define that interface. You will provide the code with the power to iterate over the records in a highly customized manner. In the case of database.queryLocator, what you are doing, you are making the records queried from the S object. But what if you are already getting, let's say, a collection? Or in my scenario, as I explained, I am already having the CSV file. I have to process that collection or the CSV file. It is not possible to do that by using the database.queryLocator. For example, I have to put a highly customized way of iterating the records. Again, that is not possible with the database.queryLocator. So in such scenarios, we will go for the iterable interface. So using the iterator interface, you can create a custom set of instructions. That's what it will allow. It will allow you to write down the custom set of instructions for traversing a list through the loop. Okay, you can traverse any collection. For example, as I said, you do have the huge number of records available in the collection, and you have to process those records one after the other using the batch Apex. The option for you is to go for the iterable interface. If you use an iterable, again, this is what you have to keep you remember with respect to the governor limit. If you are using the iterable interface, then you still have the governor limits imposed by the SOQL query. So the point here is if you are using the iterable interface, you cannot make or you cannot fetch or cannot process 50 million records. Okay, that option is not possible if you are using the iterable interface. So 50 million record option is only possible whenever you are going for the database.queryLocator. It is not possible with the iterable interface. So this is how the typical syntax of the iterable interface will look like. Here the return type is iterable, right? Here the return type is iterable, and what you have to return here is your iterable class. So for example, in this scenario, This is my iterable class, and I am returning the instance of the iterable class. Now, how to implement this iterable class? So I have put some snippet here for your reference. So for example, here you can see this is my iterable class, which is implementing iterable interface. And as we are implementing this iterable interface, it is mandatory to implement the iterator. It is mandatory to implement the iterator. Now here I have implemented the iterator method. And what is the return type of my iterator? It is the iterator of account. What is the return type here is the iterator of account. And what I am returning from this method is the iterator of account. And this is how my iterator method will look like. So here you can see that I do have a class which is implementing this iterator method. And now if I'm implementing the iterator method, it is mandatory to implement the two methods. This is the first method, that is has next, and second one here is the next method. Has next method will decide whether there is a next record is available to process or not. That will be defined by the has next method. What needs to be processed, whether the record needs to be processed or not, what business logic needs to be processed, you will put that logic under the next method. Okay, so for example, if I have to run this example, what I am doing in my iterator example here is I am making the query on the account. Okay, and what I have to do here is I have to only process the 8 records. A hypothetical scenario, definitely many of you will say that it is possible to achieve using the limit, but just for our understanding, I don't want to do it with the limit. I want to do it as an iterator interface here. So what I am doing here is I have put here I is equal to 8. I am checking when the I value is incrementing to 8 or not. I have initialized this value to 0. So when my first time this method will execute, right, it will check whether the I value is greater than the account size. The answer is yes. It will go and return me that account, right? Like this, I am checking unless and until I am meeting this criteria. If I meet this criteria, then and then only I will stop processing. So this is how you can go and use the iterator method whenever you want to have the custom control how to process those. Now, next question here is what is the state in the batch Apex, or what is database dot stateful? Very frequently asked question, specifically for the freshers and also for the experienced professional as well. What is state in the batch Apex? So do remember that by default, your batch Apex is stateless. What does the stateless means? If the batch Apex have processed some information in the first batch of execution, it will not be carried forward in the next batch. So that's what I have put up here. If a batch process and needs information that is shared across transaction, then you have to go and use the stateful interface. By default, it is stateless. If you are putting the stateless means the information that you have processed in the previous batch, it is not carried forward in the next batch. If you have to make sure that the information is needs to be shared across the multiple transactions, then go and use the database dot stateful interface. If you specify the database dot stateful in the class definition, you can maintain the state across this transaction. Across the transaction, you have to maintain the state, go and implement this. For example, if your batchable job is executing one logic and you need to send an email at the end of the batch job, where you have to go and put how many successful records and the failed records. So what you have to do here is here you have to go and send the summary of how many successful records that you have processed, how many failed records that you have processed, and you want that count should be coming up across the batches, right? Not from one single batch. Then in such scenarios, you go and implement the database dot stateful interface. So this is an example how you should do that. So here you will be putting up my batch job, right? And here you have to make sure that you are implementing this interface. If you are implementing this interface, whatever the primitive data types that you have defined here, this primitive data types will hold the values across the transaction. So here you can see that I have initialized that value as 0. And in my multiple batches, I am incrementing the value. So what will happen? How many records that has been processed by this particular variable? If I have to check under the finish method, I can easily do that. Because now I have implemented the database dot stateful. That means the value of this variable will be persist across the multiple batches as well. Very helpful interface, very frequently we use in our real world examples as well. Next one, can we do the callouts in the batch Apex? Again, the answer to this is yes, we can do the callouts in the batch Apex as well. And to do the callouts, we have to implement another interface, that is the database.callout interface. We have to go and implement another interface, that is the database.callout interface. And this is how the syntax will look like. Here you have to go and specify database.allow callout. Sorry, it's a typo from my side, right? But this is the correct interface name that you have to implement, database.allows callout. Next one, how to do the error handling in batch Apex. And this is again one of the favorite questions specifically for the experienced professional. How you can do the error handling in the batch Apex. And the very good part here is it is very easy to implement. So any batch Apex can implement an interface here, that is the database.raise platform event. So this event will be automatically invoked, automatically fired whenever your batch Apex encountered any error or exception. So your answer should be to implement the error handling in the batch Apex. We should go and implement an interface, that is database.raise platform event. And this this event will be automatically invoked whenever any error or exception occurred in our code. How to implement that? It's very simple, database.raise platform. I have put a very detailed video how you can go and do the error handling with the help of batch Apex under my platform event series. If you are preparing for it and want to know more about the error handling in the batch Apex, make sure that you folks check that out as well. There I have written down the code and actually shown you the scenario how the multiple tasks will be created in case any error encountered in your batch Apex. So do check that out. Now, what are the key limits of the batch Apex that you should know? For the batch Apex, the key limit that you should know here is up to 5 jobs can be queued or at a time active for the batch. Up to 5 queued or active jobs are allowed for the batch. Your batch Apex can process 50 million record if you are using the database.query locator. In case there are more than 50 million records, again your batch Apex will terminate immediately and will mark that complete process as failed. Next one here is the start, execute, and finish method can implement 10 callouts each. So in the start method, execute method, and the finish method, you can implement the 10 callouts each. Next one, this limit is very important. The maximum number of batch execution here is 250,000. 250,000 for 24 hours. The maximum number of batch execution here is 250,000 per 24 hours. Again, if you are hitting the limit, your batch Apex will not be processed. And the last one here is, which is again not known to many people, only one batch Apex job start method can run at a time in an organization. So in your org, at a time only, the one batch Apex start method is running. In case that method is running, other methods will be into the queue. Again, they will not fail. They will be in the queue, right? However, multiple execute methods can run in parallel. So keep a note that only one start method can be running at a time. Batch Apex that haven't started yet remain in the queue until they are started. Now, these are the few questions that I want you guys to attempt and let me know the answers in the comment section. The first one here is, what is the batch size if we don't use the optional scope parameter? What is the default batch size for the batch Apex? Next one here is how you can execute the batch job. Which method that you will use to execute the batch job, which method you will use to execute the queuable job, and which method you will use to execute the schedulable job. The schedulable job can be executed by a two approach. First one, from your UI approach. So I'm not asking here about from the UI. I'm asking about from the developer console. If I ask you to execute the schedulable Apex, which command you will use and what parameters you will pass. Again, I do insist, do try to attempt these questions. The reason I give this question, as I mentioned in the past videos as well, so that you are also encouraged to do your own self study as well. I hope you folks found this video helpful. Do let me know in the comment section if you do have any questions or any queries or your thought about this series as well. Moreover, any other question that you think we have not covered in this series and we should be covering it again, let me know in the comment section. Thank you, folks. That's all I do have for today. Bye bye.